I'd say there's many paths in life. There's many paths, and sometimes the road less traveled might be a better one than the one that other people are telling you to take.
Mm.
So your parents are well intended, but I think kids feeling pressure to go to college right away and get into a great college is such a it's such a distraction from young people finding their true north, finding their passions and their interests.
Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. All right, well, welcome to Insights into Success, where today my special guest is Howard Steinberg. Howard, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to talking to you and understanding a bit more about your story. But I think first, just to give people a bit of an idea about who you are, I think if I was to summarize, I'd say that you've been a very successful entrepreneur. You're an author, and we're about to talk about that book. You also do mentoring and you're an advocate. So I just wonder if you could start off really by just telling us about your book and what the motivation was for it.
Well, believe it or not, it was a calling. I was an entrepreneur for most of my life. I was a husband for almost all of my adult life and a father. And all those things started to come apart several years ago. A very long partnership finally frayed and divorced. I got played out of my second startup, and I was feeling kind of untethered from the world. My kids had grown up, and so I always identified with these roles that I played in the world, and it's how I defined myself. And as those started to loosen, and I was confused. I was trying to start yet another company, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't feel that conviction, that inevitability that I once had, and that kind of triggered an investigation. Like, okay, if I'm not going to be an entrepreneur yet again, and I'm no longer a husband, and my kids are grown up, who am I? And I learned transcendental meditation to kind of try to quiet my mind and listen to intuition, which was a whole new concept for me.
Yeah.
Since I was a child, I've just been going and working and working and working, and never had a sense of having free choice in determining what to do or even who I am. And so that's when the investigation started, and I learned a lot. And in that process, and it's never over, I said, I've got a story to tell. And as I share this with people, they encourage me, and that you got to share more of this. And I just started writing. And since a memoir can be sort of chronological, it was easy to just go from the beginning to the present. And it wasn't quite that simple, but that's what led me to tell my story, Confessions of a Problem Solver.
And so for you, the motivation for the book, was it more about sort of working through your own therapy? Like, did you have any grand designs in terms of lots of people reading the book, or was it more just about you and you, as I say, sort of going through your own therapy, as it were?
Yeah. It's a good question. It started more just therapeutically, just a cathartic exercise of getting this all out. Like, even if it doesn't get published, my kids will have it, so they could better understand their dad. And as I got going, I realized it was a richer story, and what really felt as a calling to help others, to be of service. And that's where I am now in my life. And it felt like a portal to connecting with others who may be struggling in similar ways, and recognizing that there's more to this than the begrudging role they've accepted in their lives.
So what does your life look like at the moment? Like, are you working as a coach, mentor? What all do you do?
Well, the book's keeping me pretty busy, and before the actual publication, um, it I worked really hard to not do anything, to have complete autonomy and let my days kind of unfold as they do. But yeah, I work with some startups and mentor and just advise. Because I've had type 1 diabetes all my life, I'm very committed to the cause of diabetes and medication and supply access. Um, and I just casually, I no longer do the business stuff, just doesn't turn me on anymore. And so I enjoy just interacting with different people from different aspects of society that I can sometimes coach and help in their journeys.
So I'm interested to know why the business side of things doesn't sort of spin your wheels anymore. But I'm wondering whether we should maybe go back and get a bit of a background on you first, and through that, that might actually start to reveal at least part of why you've got to where you are with your entrepreneurial journey. But so could you take me back and just sort of give us a little bit of an understanding about your family life and your family when you were a young child, and just give us a little bit of an overview on your life?
Yeah. Well, the author Gabor Mate, who I think is brilliant, always says everything happens in childhood, and it really determines how we navigate life. And most of us aren't conscious of that. It's not something we can easily tune into, but the more work I've done, I've realized how all those experiences and some traumas of childhood, it completely influenced how I navigated life completely. I may have thought that I had free choice, but I was programmed in my nervous system to approach life in a certain way, mostly because on the one aspect of my childhood was my parents were both Holocaust survivors, and my mother was the only survivor from her family, and that had its implications in the environment of our household, which could be dark, and joy was not to be trusted. Performance and achievement were what was valued, and I had trouble performing because it wasn't diagnosed at that time, but I clearly had ADD, difficulties in school and focusing. And then when I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, back then referred to as juvenile diabetes. And my parents were really ill-equipped to process that along with me, because they had shut down, particularly my mother, her heart, because she didn't want to feel that kind of loss or pain. So I found myself, and I've long since forgiven them and understand what they were dealing with, but it was, this trauma of theirs I inherited, and intergenerational trauma is a real thing, and I could really wax on about that and how you can actually feel it in your body and your nervous system. So I got this scary disease, and there was no one there to say it's going to be okay, you're safe in this world. And I kind of had to self-parent through adolescence. I could tell many anecdotes and scary stories. And my parents, I remember we didn't have talks, but they sat me down soon after I was diagnosed. And, I could feel them conspiring and wanting to talk to me, which was very unusual. And what they expressed was, you don't have to tell anyone about this diabetes. So in some sense, it was a relief to me. Yeah, good. I want to keep it a secret, because my fragile little psyche didn't want to feel different from everyone. Yeah. But it also sent another signal to me that this is indeed something to be ashamed of, or something that makes me fragile or less desirable or different. And I'd started navigating life with that as my deep, dark secret. It took on such proportions for me that were, way beyond the norm of being discovered. Like, it was so scary that anyone would find out. So from that moment on, I started navigating life with simply to be safe and survive. And that is how I progressed well into adulthood. And, the first kind woman that crossed my path as my friend, and as soon as I got to college, I eventually married because it said, stay with me, help keep me safe, was the emotion I was feeling, but not necessarily what I was sensing consciously. And then entrepreneurship seemed inevitable as well, because I could, as they say, eat what you kill. The efforts I put into work and business, I will recognize its benefits, and I could kind of have more control of my days and thus my blood sugars. So the controller in me took over, and that's an ego emotion. That's an ego part, not a felt part. So my ego was very active. That controller was very active, keeping me safe, but also separating me from the world, separating me from life, and feeling very detached. And always, but children gave me purpose. I loved being a dad. My businesses were, challenging, but certainly the first business was very successful. So I was getting reinforcement of the lifestyle I was living, but there was always something wrong. There was always this discomfort, and like, there's got to be something else. There's got to be something more.
Before the interview, I was reading about your parents and you, and obviously the fact that they were Holocaust survivors. And I was just sort of reflecting on that. I'm like, I don't know, like, you just couldn't blame them for anything. What they went through is horrendous. And there was not the support structure then for them to navigate through it without being long-term scarring. And at the same time, for them unwittingly to have a significant impact on your life as a consequence of what they've been through. And I'm like, it's just like, to me, a victim, a faultless situation, or, that no one's to be blamed for it. What they went through just doesn't bear thinking about. And of course you're going to be damaged from it.
Yeah, it's a very good recognition. Not only did that impact how I navigated life, it affected how my kids are navigating life, how I parented. So if we accept, there's a joke that says, we wouldn't need psychiatrists if there weren't parents, because certainly parents, give us that imprint and how we're raised. So if you've suffered, incomprehensible trauma, as my parents did, particularly my mother, it's going to have its impact on how you parent. In this case, overprotective, secretive, but hard. Like, I never heard "I love yous" or got hugs, because going there was just too much for them. And I never thought about it. I kind of...
No, you wouldn't. You didn't know any different.
Exactly. Like, I didn't process the Holocaust as a child. It was just, they're old and they have funny accents from the old country, and I don't really want to connect with that. But I can tell you, it's come up since, particularly in the last several years, as I've done so much deep work, that that sadness of and the impact, that trauma of the Holocaust, I can feel it in my body. I can spontaneously cry when triggered by visuals. And when I think about my mom's mother and sisters who were, murdered and had to, and fell in the ditches that they dug, it's incomprehensible. So so then I inherited that survival gene. So in many ways, I was fortified by this resilience, this ability to one foot in front of the other to keep going. But it's a losing game, man. It catches up with you. It's not, you eventually can't, or I couldn't sustain myself just with my mind being determined. My heart needed attention.
And was there something in particular in your life that was a catalyst for all these things to just sort of explode, as it were, with loss of your marriage, etc.? Or what would you put
It,
it down to? And obviously, you change from being very much into being an entrepreneur to no longer having the stomach for it.
yeah. And you asked a question earlier, which I didn't quite answer, is where, well, how the business, I lost interest in business, but
Yeah,
it's well, when you awaken to something bigger in the world, in your life, and fortunately, I have the privilege of having some money, so I didn't, I no longer had that pressure to, that I have to start another company to feed my family and pay a mortgage. I had
yeah,
I had the freedom, I had the liberation to determine my path. And so it was kind of a combination of, I was always sort of a seeker. Like there was a quiet whisper within me of wanting to be more comfortable in the world, to feel more present to it. So I was always seeking. I would go on retreats. I would learn, I would try things. I did talk therapy forever, but nothing quite really worked. And then when life, this life's twist where, we held on to the marriage for so long, we tried our best, and finally giving up and just feeling so utterly alone in the world. I didn't have a team of people around me and employees and working against a common cause. And again, my kids left the nest and building their own lives, that there was no place else to go but in. And so, yeah, I could have resorted to other less healthy distractions, but that's when the deep work began. And it still goes on naturally.
Mm. And in terms of the deep work that you refer to, what does that entail?
Well, my life, I grew up in Queens, New York, and working class roots, and then most of my adult life was in nice suburbs of New York and Connecticut. Moved to the city about 7 years ago after divorce, and I dove in. And I met this spiritual therapist, Anne, who was at the time 86 years old, and it was during COVID. Even though, and we only shared our screens. We never even met in person. But she gently started nudging me towards my heart, towards feeling and getting deeper. Because I would come, as I would to any therapist meeting, with an agenda. I want to talk about my marriage or my business, or here's my problems. And it was just this cycle that would keep repeating and keep repeating. And she nudged me and she recommended two books that really were pivotal in changing my perspective. One, Ram Dass, Be Here Now, and the other, Eckhart Tolle's The New Earth. And both, talked about this concept of non-duality, of being that there is only one existence that's bigger than us, and how to be more present to the moment. And it got me thinking. And then, because my issues around control were so rigid and so intense, I read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, which ushered in the renaissance of psychedelics that is still going on today. And I feared psychedelics when I was of age, when many people do try it in college, because as a type 1 diabetic, I wanted to feel control of my body and symptoms. It was too scary to do that. And it was still scary, but with determination and deliberation, I went through the process, found a shaman, and I started a path. And psychedelics, different medicines, from mushrooms, psilocybin, to ultimately ayahuasca, opened these neural pathways, showed me more, softened me. There's not good language for all of this, but that's when the work could really accelerate. And it was still work. I didn't go, I didn't sit and do psychedelics so routinely. They were honored ceremonies by very professional people. who I sat with in ceremony, and I saw my wounds more clearly, and there weren't, there were some really interesting insights, but nothing so revelatory or big epiphanies. But the layers started to come off, and the dots started to connect. Oh, okay, that happened in childhood, and that was a real determinant of how I did this. And I was able even to look back at my marriage and understand our roles differently. And I think you said something in the beginning. It's like all of this is faultless, right? Like our parents are doing their
Yeah.
best. I would give my mother crap all the time and push back, and she would, dismiss me. Harvard, I'm doing the best I can. And that's now, that's what I would say to my kids,
Mm.
because when we trigger someone else, it's often from a wounded place in us that occurred in childhood. And when we feel triggered, it's also from a wounded place that we feel in childhood. So if you start to operate from a place of compassion, forgiveness, and understanding, you don't get triggered so easily. You don't react in that primal way, which was how I was navigating the world with my reptilian brain. So now I'm able to just soften it and respond more clearly to whatever's happening in front of me, or more softly.
And has that resulted in a noticeable change in your relationships with your children?
Yeah, I believe. I don't know what they'd have to say, but I think they do notice that too, where um, as I got very conscious of like kind of the triggering dynamic, um, I realized that what I'm saying to them now can feel like something I said when they were 5 or 3 or 7. So that's how they're processing me. So I learned to be just really gentle and, watch my words, slow down, and just, I say this all the time, just patience and love, patience and love. I don't need to parent adult children. You can't parent adult children. So just shut up. Like I'm not here to teach them anymore. I did, and maybe sometimes intense for them. So the absence of those of those behaviors, I think, is what is allowing them to feel more comfortable in my presence and to bring us closer together.
And have you ever sat down and talked to them about your parents' Holocaust experience and your realization of the impact that's had on you? Have you ever had that sort of discussion?
Um, yes and no. I think just as I didn't care to know so much history of my parents, they're dealing with their own lives, but I've always made remarks about the way I parented was a result of how I was raised in a household that, like, what was familiar to me was just living around criticism and judgment, and that was my parents trying to motivate me.
Yeah.
And so I did the same, even though I said I never would, with my own children. And when I grew in this work, I apologized to them, saying, I have daughters, and I said, there's two jobs, at least two jobs of a father, and one is to make you feel safe and secure, and I did that well, and the other is to make you feel seen and beautiful. And I didn't do that so well because I was too busy trying to make you into, responsible adults, and bad on me. So they hear it, and I think they accept it, and and it's a process.
Yeah, well, it's something that obviously, taken some time to really step back and appreciate, in terms of what the ramifications were of your upbringing.
Yeah.
I just don't know what you could do differently, like as a child and as a parent that's been through it back in those times. I just
Yeah. What was always, I think about a lot is how they went through so much, but how did they cope? Like they seem to sleep at night, because I have trouble sleeping, I'm so anxious. They
Yeah.
didn't take any psychotropic medicines. They didn't see psychiatrists or therapists. They didn't even
Mm,
have that big circle of friends. They just went forward, and, with that grit of survivors. But
mm,
yeah, and, look, Holocaust is one example of, incredible trauma, but there's many versions of it. And that's why I
yeah.
think for a long time I minimized whatever I was dealing with, because it wasn't a Holocaust. Yeah, so I've got,
Yeah.
diabetes. And I write in the book, in the introduction, there's many pains. There's people who have had bigger traumas and bigger pains, but it's my pain and it's my trauma, and
Yeah.
how it was processed is what matters. And it's not it's not necessarily what you do, or it's what you believe. And if you believe these stories about yourself, like I'm less than, I'm inadequate, I'm damaged, that were, in my body, in my nervous system, then that takes really conscious work to get past. And that's the work I'm still doing.
So back when you were an entrepreneur, because of your upbringing, that were you sort of just a real go 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 person? You're very motivated. Everything was just push push push, and not really taking the time to step back and enjoy things. And that, do you think you were always kind of like being driven by sort of this fear of failure, and the need to survive and navigate your way through life without without failing?
Yeah, you nailed it. Like, it was almost as if, you know there's sharks circulating, and if I stay still, I'll get bitten. So I, like, one anecdote was, when I sold my first company, 9 years after I started it. I went in, did the big closing in the city, and took the train home back. And now I was much wealthier than I was before. And, I went back to the office and everyone wanted to celebrate. I said, no, let's get back to work. That was it. Like, nothing changed. Nothing
Wow.
changed in feeling. It was just like, and that's why the title of the book, of Confessions of a Problem Seeker, was I was never present. I was always thinking about what's next, analyzing what
Yeah.
I did wrong, looking back, and never quieting the mind just to feel joy and celebration. And many instances of that. But I'd notice it. I'd notice that, God, I wish I could just, take a breath and enjoy where I am, what I'm doing. And I'd say the times that was easiest was just in the presence of family and children, who were such beautiful distractions for me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just listening to that, I can just sort of visualize it, how you missed out in celebrating moments like you otherwise could have, because of your psyche, because of the way you approach life at the time. Presumably that's changed now though, and you look to enjoy each moment a lot more.
I tried, but this work, again, because I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and always forget the author's name, Van den Kirk, that so much of what happens to us, certainly in trauma, is embedded in our nervous system, in our bodies. So the conscious work can get used just so far. So if I grew up fearful that I could have a low blood sugar and pass out and go into a coma and die,
Yeah.
so I have to be vigilant. And back then there were no devices, no blood sugar testing. You were based using symptoms a lot to manage. That got embedded in me, and add to that I was keeping it a secret. So it was like my private, I'm always scanning. I'm always scanning for what's wrong. And so, I never felt safe in the world. And everything I was doing was attempting to do that. So still, like, my comfort zone can be rather small. But I now, the most important thing, or one of the most important things in my development, was cultivating the witness. So that is almost like another entity that's watching what's going on. Oh, okay, Howard, you see what you're doing here, and how you're reacting to this situation. Let's unhook from that and just breathe for a moment. And so the more you do that, the longer the periods of peace and satisfaction are, and the shorter the periods of anxious stress. And
But
there's
it's
many.
not easy doing that, though, is it? Not easy to
No,
do that, or at least not for me.
no, we're mammals. We react. It's it's not easy. But I find myself like where there could be an altercation with someone cutting me off, or in so many instances where I laugh. I can just I said and look back and said, I can't believe that I used to get upset over those things. Yeah. But no, it still works.
That ability to self-reflect, to be able to step back and pause in the moment and not just react. It's a great skill. It's a challenge to do it. I'm trying to work on it, but it's just a great thing if you can do it in the moment, rather than, I find for myself, I feel like I'm lazy when I just react. I don't pause, I just react. And I kind of feel like part of it's just a laziness. It's just easy to react rather than doing the hard work of pausing.
Yeah.
Like you said, like having a third person, review it and speak to you about it before reacting.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't even get that far to be a thought, because once you're triggered, you're in it, and then it's a backing off, and that happens a lot too. Like okay, like I see what I just did. Let me return to a softer, kinder place. Yeah.
And I mean that's part of it, I guess, isn't it? Like if you're not able to sort of pause and review before reacting, at least recognizing afterwards and then working towards it is at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. The work I do now is called somatic therapy, where it's I wouldn't have guessed it could be so productive, where you go into the body more and see what you're feeling, and you do this routinely. See what comes up, see what's calling your attention, and sit with it. And so it's a reprogramming. And you then, boy, interesting. I am feeling, even after that, you start to notice that you just are softer, and the wired primal reaction to things just softens.
So how do you feel about your life now? What's your feelings about it all now?
It's really interesting. I probably had, I'm sure I did, but it wasn't conscious, this deep fear of mortality at a premature age, and that's why I clung to relationship to help heal me, protect me, make me feel safe. And now, as I should be thinking about mortality, some 56 years since I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I'm healthy and have no complications from it, and can start to accept like that the implications of, I'm past the crisis of that. I can understand that rationally, where accepting mortality, that it's going to happen someday, is so relieving of this kind of ambiguous burden that I was carrying. And the other thing that makes me so much more comfortable in my life and day to day, and this hard work continues as I worked in getting comfortable in solitude, because solitude was scary for me. I went from my mother to my wife, essentially. I moved in with my ex-wife before my 18th birthday, and we stayed together for over 40 years. So I was never alone. was never alone in the world. I felt good with my family around. I felt safe and protective in our home. And I worked hard to make money to build, a big moat around our castle, if you will. But all
Yeah.
that was gone. And so I'm out in the world alone and I felt very untethered. But I hung in. And then there was like, in just recent months, like I recognized, wow, I really like myself. Like I can actually touch the goodness in me. And everyone says it's so important to love yourself. And I preach that all the time. Being kind to ourselves and loving ourselves is the answer. It truly is. But just me wanting to do that, just me telling myself wasn't enough. But my work said, wow, I can feel it. And I can relax into it, and just feel comfortable in my authentic self. Paul, there was a study done in palliative care of what are the greatest regrets of the dying.
Yeah.
And you know what number one was? It's not what people think. It's not, I wish I spent more time with my friends and family. And it wasn't, I wish I didn't work so hard. It was, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself. Imagine, so you grow a lot when you're facing mortality, because you're in that moment of you don't give a crap about anything. There's nothing. There's just nothingness. And that's when so when you're facing that, you say, God, I wish I could have been this my whole life. And so that realization, when I read that, I said, man, first, that's got to be the first paragraph in my book, because it really tees up the whole journey, right? To find who you are, your true self, because we're all good, we're all good, but we've told ourselves stories for decades and decades that we're not, or we're less than, or we believed other people's opinions, or we care so much about the validation of others just to validate our existence. Not anymore. I'm good with me, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, well, that is a good place to be. I mean, we only get one shot at this, so you want to feel at peace with yourself and find joy as much as you can every day. So, yeah, there's no dress rehearsal. This is it. So you got to make the most of it.
Certainly.
So, having learnt what you have, like, what would your advice be to younger people, starting out in life, as they reach adulthood and that? What would your advice be to people?
Well, it's probably a lot of, the typical advice, young people get, but, I'd say there's many paths in life. There's many paths. And, sometimes, the road less traveled might be a better one than the one that other people are telling you to take. So, your parents are well intended, but, I think, kids feeling pressure to go to college right away and get into a great college is it's such a distraction from young people finding their true north, finding their passions and their interests. I was probably a creative. I like to think of myself as a creative, innovative person, but my parents couldn't see any of that. All they could see was me doing poorly in school. So I was at risk. There was no attempt by them, or even the New York City public school systems of the 70s, to say, oh, you've got other talents, let's move you into this path or that path. So, to the extent, and it's just, I realize it's not always easy to explore and try to find what you really like, and, and then move in a direction of a career that you would do for free, if you could, because you have such passion for it, and then worry about making a living. And I get that could be, fairly lofty kind of advice. And the other thing I would say is just, you're good enough. You're good enough, and be kind to yourself. Don't be so harsh and judgmental, and keep believing in your own goodness. And then, it's just living, authentically and not caring so much about what other people think of you. And again, it depends where you are in life and at what age, because those words would just, go in one ear out of the other of an adolescent who's worried, is so focused on socialization and likes on their Instagram or whatever. That's a whole other dark rabbit hole to go down about how social media and devices are hurting our young people.
Absolutely. And I think, like, my podcast is called Insights into Success. And I think one of the things I think I have had reinforced to me through this journey is the importance of people defining their own success rather than being the success that the general public would define as success. For instance, being really rich or famous or that, or having a certain number of likes or whatever. That people need to just look at what will make them happy, what would be success, what would that look like for them, and don't worry about whether it makes other people happy or not. It's what's important to you. So, yeah, hopefully with these interviews, people will get some inspiration and find their own way in life and find their own successes, whatever those successes might be.
Yeah, I kept pursuing achievement and validation and financial success, but it didn't fulfill me. In the end, I felt safe. So Maslow's hierarchy, I was living at the bottom, at that bottom rung of safety and security, and it didn't matter how much money I made. And people would say, "Oh, you're successful," or this. I said, "What? I don't feel it. I felt like an imposter. I didn't feel like I fit in even into the clubby world of business too. Like I'd always be looking for the misfits that were looking from the outside in and questioning, and I was always questioning, like the authenticity of of my work, of my life, and how I was relating to people. Hard to understand where it all came from, but I was never quite comfortable in the boardroom, and that had its implications. You could say adverse implications, because I had one board member who was very successful CEO, who pulled me aside and said, "You're too honest, man. Don't be so honest," because I just wanted to work from a humanistic place and like connect with board members or anyone that I was pitching and say, "Come on, we could figure this out together." No, it was hard for me to play the political game.
Right.
But I hustled, and I could sell and I could create, and I did my best. I did my best.
So I'm just conscious of time, so we need to wrap this up. So one final question for you, though. What would you consider to be your greatest success so far in life?
I'd say there are two things. One is my kids, not just to be cliche, but I've got 3 beautiful daughters who are, splendid, responsible adults and good citizens of the world, and 2 granddaughters who are the apple of my eye. And when I close my eyes and just want to smile, that's what I think of. And I think the other, as as sappy as it might sound, Paul, is just I'm a good human. That's who I'm, a kind, decent human that treats people respectfully and kindly, and just the love I have in my heart and the ability to feel that and share it is what else is there?
And so that last point, if we were to say jump back 10 years ago, or that before your marriage splits and all that, would you have been able to say that then, or is that something you've only been able to say in recent times with all your work?
No, I wouldn't be in touch with that. They say the longest journey is from your head to your heart. And this head was so busy, that brain. And that's why, the subtitle of the book is my lifetime journey from busy brain to loving heart. No, even though, it was calling me, like there was, like I had an awareness, but not a real understanding, a real connection to my heart. And it's a very different place of navigating life in your heart space. And my empathy has increased, my compassion has increased. No, and back then, like 15 years ago, I would have been making fun of these spiritual people, the Hare Krishners here in Washington Square Park. Now I walk up to them and I ask them questions because in understanding their spiritual journey and what makes, they're happy chanting songs and tapping on tambourines. Well, there's maybe I'm the one that's crazy, and they're the ones that have figured it out. So
the enlightened ones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Howard. It's been really very interesting to listen to you. Your book, we will put that in the link when we publish this, so people can get a hold of that book. But you've remarkable journey, and I just think, gosh, how would I have navigated it? Yeah, very, very challenging, but enlightening at the same time, or at least you got to a point where you're able to reflect on everything and hopefully be at more peace with everything. So yeah, really inspirational. So thank you so much.
Right.
And
thank you
for agreeing to stay. And thank you for agreeing to stay on for the Read to Succeed too. So anyone that wants to hear about books that Howard would recommend, stay tuned because we're going to do a separate segment on that. So thank you.
Thank you.